we could run down the panel, and you might want to think about it yourselves. Just what's the coolest thing you've seen in the last 6 months, apart from your children? We said that's the only, you can't use that, get out of jail. So
coolest thing. All right. So one of the clients I'm working with, we did some studies talking to different companies, and one of them was a cosmetics company called Sephora, who some of you may know. They do some pretty cool stuff. I'm trying to remember the name of the company, which I looked up earlier, but I can't remember. But they do a really cool augmented reality thing, which is they call it their magic mirror. You go in there, and you can basically put makeup on your face, change your hair color. And it's a very interesting thing. So there's a lot of talk about augmented reality, virtual reality. I don't want to spin that into a separate debate. I'm actually very skeptical about virtual reality. I think it's almost like 3D TV. It's hard to catch off mass market when you have to plug something big on your face, right? In my opinion. Now, but the augmented reality thing I think has some great applications. And this is one that they've got some things with Sephora. They're using things with Bausch & Lomb where you can see what your eyes look like with different colors. Different colored contacts. They do some really cool stuff. It puts it on your face. You can move your face in real time, and it's actually really cool tech. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Did you do your mascara well?
I did, and I have to say I did look quite good with long blonde hair as well.
We want to see that picture.
Yeah.
We do have social media handles where Rob will post pictures of himself with mascara, I'm sure, in the next 24 hours.
There's a few up there already, cool. But if you want new ones, I'm sure we can arrange that, yeah.
Nice. Alexandra, coolest thing that you've seen?
Well, I was going to talk about VR, but now it's out, so I'll go for... Actually, I talked about us scaling up in the last 6 months, and I want to give kudos to my team, because they've been so cool in the last 6 months. They each have their own passions, and they're so passionate about LinkiLaw, and working with a team.
Hang on. That's almost your own children.
That's almost
that's
my own
almost
children.
your children.
But they're not. So,
right.
So they're really, really cool.
Okay. Cool. Moving on.
So I am going to tell you about a company called BuzzMove. Anyone here know BuzzMove? Well done. So why are BuzzMove cool? Well, in September last year, they raised £6 million. And so that's quite a cool thing in its own right. But here's what you don't know about BuzzMove. Becky Downing, who started the company, started it 3 years ago. She was a corporate lawyer, left, and started a business. She went into the Wire Accelerator. During the course of the Wire Accelerator, she set out to raise £400,000. The week before the funding was due to close, her two co-founders walked out of the business and left her on her own. The investors walked away. It was the week before Christmas. That was 3 years ago, and last September she raised £6 million. The business has pivoted, it has grown, it has developed a very strong big data play in InsurTech. It's gone through the startup bootcamp InsurTech Accelerator, so its second accelerator, and now it's raised £6 million. Why do I think this is cool? It's because when I mentored Becky at Wire, one of the things she asked me was, as a corporate lawyer, what did I think it took to be an entrepreneur? And I said determination and resilience. And I can't think of any better example, any cooler example of determination and resilience than someone whose business nearly collapsed the week before Christmas 3 years ago and raised £6 million last year, and is worth about £30 million now. So for me, that is cool.
Nice.
I guess what I'm trying to work out is what I can and can't say. I have a client, just riffing off the perseverance thing. I have a client who basically came to me about 2 years ago, and he has basically worked out how to use mesh technology to make communication possible in the tube. And I'm really excited about it. Unfortunately, he can't be here tonight. But it's basically using the Bluetooth protocols available in all our phones to act like a mesh network and communicate messages. It's going to start with something as simple as your travel updates when you're stuck on the tube. From a safety perspective, that's really important. But it's interesting to see what the future application of that will be. It's properly disruptive in that sort of classic sense. it will allow for the sort of that last bit of data to get to people where you just can't get the Wi-Fi into the corners of places like stadiums or at big outdoor events. And it's great because the thing about him is his thinking is at that this is a problem and this is how it would be solved. And I really like that. You know, my job is helping people solve problems, and his job is basically to deliver that on the technical level.
Cool. Should we come back for any further ones later? So at this point, it's best if we don't go round in circles. We've only got a limited bit of time today. So I just want to get into defining the things we're talking about. So there are 3 things I think worth nailing down here. We've got incubators, accelerators, and scale-ups. So I'm going to put out there a definition and then probably watch the panel just cut this to pieces. But I have a very simple understanding. An incubator is a formal program in which ideas are initiated, early stage. An accelerator is where ideas are developed further. And a scale-up for me is actually anything that's going through rapid growth. And I was going to throw that into the panel. They're going to carve it to pieces, object or accept as we go down. But it'd be great if we could have a common understanding of the terms we're using. Otherwise, I think we risk going around in circles. So does anyone want to pick up on that?
Go ahead.
I actually looked around for the definition of a scale-up for a while. And I feel like the most accurate definition of a scale-up that I came up with, and I welcome the rest of the panel to contradict me, is so a scale-up is a business that has been growing over 20% year on year for at least 3 years, when the starting period they've had at least 10 employees. That's the definition.
Do we have a
I've
source
found.
for that?
I think it was actually Sherry Koto's.
Cool. Any comments on?
Well, one of the things I would say, and I know Sherry's name's come up a couple times. I mean, Sherry's a great source for that sort of information on scale-ups. She has a report and regularly published things on that. So yes, I would also say I think a lot of that what you said isn't not true. I think there's another dimension to look at it as well, which is from the finance and the funding point of view. And I think from an incubator is really looking at getting enough money into the business to get that initial idea off the ground. The accelerator is really funding it to get initial customers, and then scale-ups you're usually looking at beyond maybe a Series A to expand the market further. And so I think there's very different funding. And I think some of those institutions, if you're looking at an incubator or accelerator, actually really help with the money side of it, which is an interesting way of looking at it as well.
Cool.
Well, I'll add in that I think a scale-up is something that's proven its basic fundamental business model and can now replicate that in other sectors or other territories. And so the scale is doing the same thing in lots of new places rather than truly innovating. And I'm very happy with a business like that. I'm very happy to see a business like that because that is true growth. And I would add that as another layer on top. I'm not sure about 20% growth because a startup that starts with no revenue and then generates £1,000 in its first year is going to have astronomical growth in its second year. So I'm not sure the 20% measure is necessarily going to help you unless you add in some other factors to it. And I
But
think
a startup doesn't have 10 employees to start with.
no, but some do. Depends on the sector. So
I think it depends on your interpretation of whether something is a startup or whether something behaves like a startup. I've seen 1,000 companies behave like startups, right? They never scale beyond that because what happens is you've got the pride of authorship problem at the very top, all right? And the minute you can decouple...
Can you hear at the back?
I was saying that there's a significant difference between the term being a startup and behaving like a startup. We've all seen 10-person companies that are startups. I've seen 1,000-person companies that behave like startups without the discipline. And invariably what happens there is you have this train set mentality that comes from the very top. And they don't like to be told that their baby is particularly ugly. All right? So I think that one of the challenges you have in getting through that scale-up point is ego parking. and being able to accept the honesty. It may not be particularly pretty, but you need to have that thick-skinned approach to be able to accept it. And from my perspective, just speaking and listening to what Robert said, I would imagine that the first thing you want to be able to identify is if you have somebody at the top who isn't prepared to accept the fact that what they've done is crap, then they need to move on and find something else. So that's probably a very early indicator about their ability to move from startup to scale up.
I think something that's very important in scale-ups, what I've seen, is that companies that are very ready to scale are the ones that have automated most of their processes. So they aren't, so that may be customer service or finding a different way of doing something so it isn't really sort of labor-intensive. Definitely important for scale-ups.
Cool. So in terms of definition, I think we've heard from everyone now around defining these terms. I sense there's not too much disagreement. There's some more high-level descriptions and some more detailed descriptions there. Does anyone in the audience have a comment, especially if anyone's got a kind of screw that's nonsense type comment? Or any objections in particular are very welcome.
Yeah, I just have a question, I guess, about the importance of nailing down this classification. You know, I guess, why is it important for entrepreneurs to know kind of where they fit, or is it important really for the intermediaries to know where they fit, or is it important for the investors to know where a specific idea? I guess just why are we? I think it's very nice and educational, but what's the importance of nailing down this definition?
From my perspective, it's not. It's a label. It's an artificial construct that helps structured people understand what they're trying to get into. Okay, I'm not structured. Trust me, people have tried to manage me. They've all given up. All right. Okay, it doesn't work. All right, because you know this is just a set of nomenclature that's being used. All right. I think that what you do is it provides a framework within which you can almost pigeonhole people, but you need to be able to explain to people the types of problems that are associated with each stage throughout that, so that then they can actually look at the remedial structure and be able to address or cross those gaps from each one. All right. So I think it's more of a progression to be able to say that you are empirically, quantitatively, qualitatively moving through a growth structure. All right. But it's purely a set of terms. I've met a number of fintechs, and you know, one of them, he's an ex-investment banker, and his goal is purely to destroy Bloomberg. All right, that is his goal. So he's not a startup. He's scale up on day one. All right, that's his goal, is completely and utterly to destroy Bloomberg. I'm not going to stop him. I'm going to help him.
Any more responses to this question? Does it matter?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question to ask. I don't think we should spend too much time on it. I don't think it's black and white. You don't get out of bed one morning and go, I'm no longer a startup, I'm now a scale-up. You progress from one stage to the other through a very murky grey continuum between the two. I don't think it is important for an entrepreneur to know. I think it's important for an entrepreneur to keep pushing forward, stay resilient, and stay strong. And you wake up one morning and you do realise that the problems that you're having are a different set of problems, but I don't think the definitions are that important.
I think it's useful to actually be aware of when you are scaling up, because it does present a different set of problems. Like you said, you're proving concept and now sort of scaling that out, either different territories, different products, acquiring a massive audience. And by being able to identify that you're doing something differently rather than going back to proving the concept works, it's how do we now apply that? What are the problems, the teething issues through recruitment, the teething issues through moving into new territories where the laws are all different. It's a shift in mindset. I don't actually ascribe to giving a shit about what your numbers actually are. It's whether or not the idea itself will scale. Whereas some businesses may start up and then establish, and that's them for the rest of their life cycle, and they will have basically the same problems from day one to day a million, whereas a scale-up will actively go through different phases. And as an advisor, seeing them at different points, and knowing that they're going to have problems along the way helps me horizon scan in terms of, have you started thinking about this, have you started thinking about that? You know, this is what's going to happen when the next big chunk of money you're going to need comes in, this is where you're going to have to be.
I think it's more important for entrepreneurs to have a rough idea where they are, but it's even more important for investors to know where to place the startup. For example, we have different stages, and based on that, we know how much funding to give you, how much equity to take, and things like that. So just really good to have a rough idea of your numbers and what stage of the company you're at.
Cool, great. At this point, I think we've got a good grasp on the subject matter we're looking at. At this point, if I could put a question to the panel, how would you say accelerator programs have changed over, say, the last 5 years? Is there an evolution? We've seen tons of accelerators springing up, a whole lot of new ones. Some are better than others. But in terms of the kind of services they're providing, is there a trend? And if we look at where they've come from, does that tell us about how they're changing in the future too? Anyone want to comment on the evolution of
Yeah, fun.
accelerators?
I've seen a change in the time frame that's involved. I've seen an understanding, a greater understanding of what an outcome from an acceleration process should be. What are the important milestones throughout that? So there's a greater understanding of what constitutes failure. If you look at across the entire spectrum of why there have been major failures, the typical things are no target audience, no provable audience, no evidence or validated proposition, either through an MVP, through customer engagement, etc. So the acceleration programs are typically trying to push that further and earlier into the process. That's my experience.
So I think it's quite interesting to see the evolution of accelerators and also work out why some of the accelerators have actually failed and gone away. So the first round of accelerators tended to be generalists. Broadly speaking, they were generalists, but in the tech space. Then we saw the emergence of the sector-specific accelerator. We saw the emergence of the corporate accelerator. And now we're seeing the emergence of accelerators that don't focus on startups, as most of them tended to focus on very early stage companies. Let's call them, rather than startups, call them early stage companies, and delivering the skills. So if you look at the early ones that I worked with, they were prescriptive. You signed up to the program, it was 12 weeks long, you had a whole bunch of lessons that you were expected to sit in on, you had homework, and you were mentored through the program. The most recent one I've worked on is Mass Challenge. You know, the Mass Challenge program started in September, ended at the end of November. It's sector agnostic. There were 100 companies in there. There are many hundreds of mentors in there. There are a whole set of workshops which you pick and choose from. They don't provide funding. They don't take equity. And I think that last change is probably the biggest one that we've seen, is that the early ones were all motivated by basically taking an equity stake in a company. Some provided funding, some didn't, and that's changed a lot. You look at Microsoft Ventures now, they focus on scale-ups. They focus on companies that have already raised £1 million. They also focus on companies that are based on the Azure platform for fairly obvious reasons. But they're looking at later stage companies, and again, everything's optional and they don't take equity. So I think that's, to my mind, the biggest change has been this, from the let's just take equity, we'll give you, £10,000 and take 10% of your company, if you're lucky. And we'll give you £20,000 worth of services in kind, including our very expensive office space in a basement somewhere. Those days are gone, thank God.
Yeah, I've noticed the competitive landscape actually between accelerators actually meant that some of the, quite frankly, awful terms that used to get dumped with, and so, if you want to join our scheme, have gone. Some of the, I was just saying, thank you for waving.
He's drowning.
Some of the, just quite frankly, draconian terms that used to sort of permeate through to startups who are going through accelerators is largely starting to disappear. For example, Mass Challenge, where we mentor, they don't take any equity, and as far as I can see, that's just a pretty sweet deal for anybody. They provide a lot of really good resource and service while you're there. Whereas in the olden days, they would just take your right hand. That landscape is certainly shifting.
Yeah, I think to build on what was said with that point, and also the whole shift away from the generalist to more specialist, I think the talent that's in there supporting companies is a lot better and a lot more specific. And I think that comes from actually not just the side of the smaller companies and the accelerators, but also from the other side, where I think there are people that have the right background that have come from some of the bigger companies that are now willing to leave and wanting to leave. So for an example, I work with a guy who's ex-Credit Suisse, he used to run a lot of the IT programs in Credit Suisse, knows the financial services market really well, and he now works with a lot of fintech companies. He's worked on a few projects with me, so we do a lot of work in that space. I think there are a lot more people like him now than there were 10 years ago. There wouldn't be a lot of people jumping ship and actually helping with that specific industry expertise.
Cool. Sounds good. So I'm going to have one more question before I do that. Please keep thinking of your questions. It's about to be your turn. But while this question is going on, I'd like to put something out to the panel and say, what is the question that you most want answered about accelerators and scale-ups? So hopefully we're coming to you for advice, but I'm sure you don't know everything, and there must be more you want to learn. So what would be most interesting for you to learn about this space yourselves is something for you guys to think about. Meantime, the question is about success and measuring success. I wonder if you could share with us what you think are good and bad measures of success for both the startups and the accelerator programs themselves.
I suppose I'll take from this side, move on down. I think within the startups that I've been working with, so it's a somewhat limited audience, I think a huge amount of honesty in management is probably a very important element. Honesty in being able to make very hard decisions, and as Robert alluded earlier on, being able to get rid of the people that are potentially an impediment to your business, and to terminate the business relationships that are not necessarily feeding you. And as Alexandra said, one of the things when she came through a hard time was being able to call back on that support network. So having that support network, having literally that sense of community within the fintechs, within the startups, where they can take honest opinions, just guided, etc.
I was hoping to go for more quantifying measures of success. So in terms of milestones, targets, it's difficult to quantify, but there are some measures that are harder than others. So there are broad things which are positive or not positive, but in terms of quantifiable targets, do you feel there are some good measures to use?
I think from my experience looking across the domain of the fintechs that I've seen, each one is so unique that being able to apply empirical evidence to it. From my perspective, we have, because we do a revenue share model, we are very, very heavily focused on what the revenue projections are. So I obviously look to see what would be achieved and what are the actual growth projections. And then we validate that in the industry. So actually having a set of clearly understood, supported, strong, robust projection figures, all right? They don't necessarily have to be at a particular level, but for me to look at that, I need to know that they are committing, and also
sales.
yes,
Right.
yes, sanity is probably one.
So is your question about the success of the accelerator program itself?
I was thinking about the startups and the accelerator programs. What measures for success can they use? So sales is an example, but are there other examples, more traditional management measures, or are there more creative
Well,
measures?
I'll take the accelerators because that's a really hard one.
Okay.
So the first thing you're going to find with accelerators is getting the truth out of them about what's actually happened with the companies that went through their program is quite difficult. They'll certainly give you answers to questions like how many companies went through your program and are still in existence today.
Yeah.
One of the measures I quite like is take a program and say how many companies are still growing 3 years after they went through the program. How many companies had a transitional event, an impact event, as a result of being in the accelerator. So I can think of companies that I've been associated with, not necessarily mentored, where they've gone through an accelerator program, and somebody in that program has opened a door that's absolutely transformed that business. completely transform, whether it's investment, whether it's commercial, whether it's bringing someone into the business, through a connection. So I think the success on accelerators is to do with, do they put companies through the program and change them, transform them? Do they grow post-program? I mean, the current trend now is for companies to go through more than one accelerator. I mentioned BuzzMove have been through 2. There are accelerator junkies out there. I know one company that's been through 4 different accelerators. And, you can't spend your whole life going through accelerators, I'm afraid. You've got to go out in the real world and build it. So, to me, that's the measure of success. So KPIs on investments, KPIs on startups. I think it's going to vary a lot. In fintech, to my mind, it could be revenue, or it could be relationships. It could be, quite simply, people. Have you moved yourself? Have you moved the dial in terms of your people and your relationships, so that I look at you now and say, as an investment, a lot of the risk is gone?
Yeah, I agree with Stuart. On the longer term, definitely a measure of success, whether the company's still going after 3 years. That would be a fair assumption. And also, I think a lot of the accelerators judge their level of success by how many of their startups or scale-ups get funding after going or during the accelerator. From my fellow entrepreneurial friends who have gone through accelerators, I'd say the most value they generally get from it is the partnerships that they form. So generally the contact base that you make in an accelerator, more specifically the partnerships that you can form going out of that accelerator, which have the potential to boost growth. On the more negative aspects, obviously, there's the equity side of things. Some of my friends have found themselves on the feeling not so good, feeling like they haven't gotten the value out of the accelerator that they wanted to, but nevertheless they gave away 6-7% of their equity.
I would say one of the measures of an early stage success is that the business itself starts to feed the founder, in that they're starting to gain traction in sales and stuff like that, and actually a little bit of money is coming into their pocket so they can continue the business as a solvent concern and move on to the next phase. So not being dead is probably a good place to start.
And just quickly from my side, measures for success for startups would be traction and revenue, just really simple. And measures for success for our program. So our program's very much focused on growth. We help your company scale up what it needs in terms of marketing. So it would be really metrics driven, as in how much have you grown since the program, and how many of the companies we worked with have actually got to Series A. That's pretty much it.
All right. I've just had a moment of inspiration. I'd love to put to the panel, I don't think it's unfair, just to say, could you name your favorite accelerator and give us a tiny snippet on why, just to squeeze in one extra question. So your favorite accelerator, 3, 4, 5 words on just why.
That's a very good question, and I'm going to pass on that one for right now. I mean, I'm not in the accelerator business too much, so I'm not going to pick names out of a hat on that one.
Fifth Amendment.
Neither am I, to be honest, but one of our partners in the US, a business like ours, doing the same thing as we do, went through 500 startups, actually, and had very good things to say about that. So from the little experience that I have with accelerators, I give that kudos to 500.
I like Mass Challenge because it's clear what the accelerator's objective actually is, and that helps find out whether or not you going through that program find alignment with that accelerator.
I never answer things simply, so I'm going to say Techstars, I would say, is the #1 accelerator, and the reason I say that is the successes that it's had. It's had more successes than failures. It's got a very, very good mentor database, some fantastic mentors in there, and I think they've got measurable transformation of businesses, and they're global. I like Mass Challenge, but I like it as a mentor because I describe it as a smorgasbord of startups. So they're sector agnostic. I can go in there and work in sectors that I can add value to, but I have no direct experience of. Growing a business is growing a business. So one of those companies is here tonight. It's in agri-tech. Love it, absolutely love it. And then finally, I'd say I love the VIEW program in Saïd Business School, which focuses purely on MBAs. So these are exec MBAs doing an MBA at Saïd. And during the course of it, they get an acceleration program, which they can opt into if they wish to. And working with that program is amazing, and the difference that Saïd makes is amazing.
Perhaps you want to say, apart from 500 startups.
I'm sorry, I'm biased. I would say 500. Mainly because we have a very strong emphasis on the mentorship. Not saying that we have 100 mentors coming in to help you. For example, we only select 5 to 8 companies in the UK. We have a very select sort of network of mentors that we actually have on the program. So 8 people, very, very well known in their fields, have so much knowledge. They come in, they spend so much time with our companies. So I feel like our companies get so much value added from just having someone very close that they can speak to, rather than changing mentors every single 10 minutes or something like that. Cool. Yeah.
I like Startup Bootcamp because it gives them, well, obviously I'm a mentor there, but in addition to that, I think that they've created a phenomenal community of industry mentors from a very broad sector, and they have also reached out to the community, the corporate community, to bring their startups in front of the major corporate participants. My experience is within banking, so they run regular events where they bring in all the major banks, so they're very much creating that community and again opening up the network, so creating those connections.
Cool. At this point, do any of the panelists have thoughts on a question that you want to have answered? Things that you're looking to find out in this space? Do you want to have a chance to put it out to the audience? Because usually we've got experts in the audience as well. Any areas of interest you want to flag up?
I have one. I have a little bit of an idea of where I see this going, but I'd love to get from the audience, or maybe from the other panelists, where they think the accelerator model is going, because we're in a technological world where a lot is now being done over the internet, online, and whether there's a chance for accelerators to actually operate in that way more, rather than just move into San Francisco or something.
Any quick fire responses? Yeah, we got a wave over there, I think.
I think it's really interesting because I think one of the great problems that VCs have is deal flow and finding quality companies. There are lots of people out there who have got good ideas, but they don't have all the components they need to deliver an investment grade opportunity. So I think the accelerator program's really got a lot to give in the future.
So one question I'd like to put to the audience is a lot of these things that we're talking about as far as incubators, accelerators, and these sort of things are set up as support structures. There's a bit of an assumption for some of the problems that are being supported. So I guess for some of you that are running these companies, that are trying to grow, that you're having these problems on the ground from day to day, what is the support that you feel you're not getting through incubators, accelerators, and you know, what would help you be more successful that you're not getting today?
Any needs not met among startups in the room? Rooms to improve on?
Hi, I'm with LinkiLaw, and I'm not talking about my startup.
Do you want to shout a bit for there?
I'm not talking about my startup in particular, but a lot of our clients do talk about loneliness and a lack of support and a lack of understanding from the people they believe would support them normally. So I guess they're spending a lot of time trying to build this dream, and they're isolated from their friends and their family who might not support their wishes and their desires to build what they're doing.
So for those at the back, I think well-being of the people involved was mentioned. Cool. Anyone want to flag up other things? Deficits? Hi, Bird.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me about it. Yeah, okay. So if I was putting together an incubator, based on the experience of knowing quite a lot of startups and being involved, building a startup from scratch, I think it'll be interesting to have them last a lot longer in terms of the duration of it. And to keep the startup at a point where it can essentially iterate its business model. Because this is kind of like the danger part, I think, for startups. And there's two dangers to it. One, that they die before they successfully iterate their business model into something they can scale. And the other thing is that they try and scale a non-functioning business model. And if there was an incubator that basically accepted that, okay, we'll keep you here for 6 months, and your job is to literally iterate what you're doing until it's marketable, until it works, until you can scale up. And you've got 6 months, and after 6 months it's dead, it's not going to happen. Or even a year. But within 6 months, if you can do it, bang, then it's straight into the next stage. And it seems like there's a number of ladders in the startup kind of ecosystem, if you like. So you go up this ladder, and then you go up this ladder, but they're not connected. And so you can get to the top of one ladder, and you can't then reach the next ladder. And it could be made, it could be properly streamlined. It could be made a lot less frictional. It could be loads more efficient. It's fairly clear, to be quite honest, how it could be made like that. I think.
Cool. Any comments from the panel on a much longer, more extended, more joined up sequence, which would have your early phase to avoid definition problems, early phase, mid phase, and later phase that goes over a longer period is proposed. Any thoughts on that kind of model?
Yeah, you know, the unanswered question for me, which I don't think anyone can answer, is what's the right model, acceleration model for a scale-up? And part of that, I think, is a revolving cohort model. So most accelerators, you all go in together, you all leave together, that's the end of the story. You're in there for 3 months normally. I think for a scale-up, you can't just say you need 3 months. You might need a year, you might need 2 years, you might need less, you might need longer. And I think having a handoff routine where companies progress through a series of helpful programs, because I don't think they'll be called accelerators personally. So you might start in an accelerator and then move into a new program which is specifically geared for the stage of business you're at, and you stay as long as it is helpful for you to be there. I am sort of vaguely conscious of the fact that some of my friends have failed to kick their kids out of their house, and at the age of 30 they're still living at home, and somewhere in there's an analogy between scale up staying in an accelerator. But I think it's absolutely right, is that, you know, you don't just go in and get 3-month dump of useful bits of information and people and mentors and then go out into the wider world and sink or swim. I think, you know, that there has to be support programs beyond all of that. There are accessible, so that there's no gaps in the rungs on the ladder.
Cool. So if we
I'm going to be slightly confrontational, but then again, hey, it's a day that ends in a Y. I've found that from working with the ones that fintechs that we're working with, we've created a very strong fail fast mentality. That was the goal, to be able to leverage what we have within SaaS, and that's what's different, is that we're giving fintechs the technology tools to speed development, all right? We're giving them access to the people, and maybe this is where we're kind of like sitting in that strange accelerator situation where I'm actually mobilizing people that really know that problem and are sitting down with the fintech and as like-minded people, and we're able to explain to them how these problems are solved or encountered, etc., in a real-world environment, all right? So if it's capital markets, real-time trading, that's what we do. If it's analytical marketing or whatever, you know, if it's surveillance, if it's fraud, if it's, you know, application fraud, if it's benefit fraud, we have specialists in those areas. So that creates an environment where you can fail fast, because it's not only the fintech, it's potentially 10 or 15 people from within SaaS who know that space, and they stop them going down the blind alleys. Because a lot of the times when you run out of time, it's because you've tried 2 or 3 things and you found that you've gone off down Tangent Boulevard. So what we are is like a checks and balances environment where we'll constantly check within my community and within SaaS and within our client base to see, are we constantly staying true to what looks like a viable proposition, all right? So in some cases we hit 3 months, in some cases we go for further, but the goal is to be constantly trying to drive towards this fail fast mentality, because you don't want people to run out of ideas when they've all run out of money and the only idea that's left is where's breakfast coming from.
I think that's okay up to a point, but one of the joys of working with startups is they don't really know what the rules are, so they'll try things that other people tell them won't work. And almost to the surprise of everyone involved, sometimes these things work. And I'd cite an example of somebody who's been mentioned already this evening, which is FanDuel. Now, FanDuel happens to be a company I adore. I think this is an amazing company. 5 years ago, this was a startup 5 years ago. Okay? It was based in Edinburgh. And everyone in Edinburgh said, there's no market for what you want to do. It'll never work. Okay? 2 years ago, they raised money at a $980 million valuation. I think I would have bunged the extra 20 million in myself to get the unicorn, because that's how I operate. But that's a great British success story.
I think personality has a lot to do with it as well. I mean, because you get people in the accelerators, and sometimes being in an accelerator is not the right environment for everybody, so I want to put that out there. But actually having to go through those iterations and being aware that it's a constant process to actually find a product that people want isn't just an automatic thing. You have a good idea, but then you've really got to spend a lot of time working at it. And I think for the accelerators themselves, giving people a whole year in which to basically may be too long for some of these people, whereas within 3 months you get a better view of what's going on. So I like the idea of accelerators that with the people that have done really well in the accelerator and actually really on a trajectory and a vector, being able to stay on where it's beneficial rather than just being dumped into the cold is probably a good way to go. It doesn't have to be a black and white, it's a year, it's 3 months, it's whatever. I think as long as the founders have got the energy to keep going and are finding traction, then they should keep going until they're at the point where it's not the right environment for them anymore.
Cool. Definitely got to break in now. So, questions in the audience? The question is, how do you measure success in accelerators in less developed countries, for example, Southeast Asia?
I mean, how to assess to accelerator program in
Access.
yeah.
Oh, how to apply it.
Yeah, how to apply it. What criteria are you looking for?
Well, 500 startups invests in companies in Thailand, in China, all around the world. So I don't think it's sort of looking for an accelerator program within your country as such. It's just applying to these international ones, and I think it's the same process.
So I think they're coming to you. I don't think you should apply to an international accelerator. I have witnessed Mass Challenge in Australia trying to do things the American way in Australia and getting pushback from Australia. Southeast Asia, accelerators are popping up all the time. Startup Bootcamp got a Fintech accelerator in Singapore. I think it's on its 3rd cohort. It's very successful. There's a strong investor environment there. Angel's Den's just opened up in Thailand. So I think there's a recognition that there are models now that we can take, some of which work, some of which don't. And creating a framework for an accelerator in a new territory, it's very important that support that's provided to the companies is local, that it understands the local business, that the way it operates, what the rules and regulations are. And I would say to you that those programs do exist in Southeast Asia, but there's a lot less of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with him. I'm not saying that we're only in the US or whatever. We actually do have an office in South Korea and in parts of Asia. You just have to look for them. But yeah, essentially that's it really.
I think having grown up and experienced different cultures, having grown up in both Switzerland and Russia, more developed, less developed, I can definitely agree with Stuart when he says that different countries have different ways of doing business, and an accelerator coming from a more developed country like the US and the UK into Southeast Asia could clash because even the mentors are not really aware with the way business is done. So how do you access? The solution is maybe not necessarily going to an accelerator, but I know that there are many groups and many individual mentors that are in Southeast Asia and that know the industry and the way that business works in Southeast Asia. And so maybe looking for that bite size or ongoing advice from fewer people rather than joining an accelerator could be an answer to that.
Great. Next one.
I didn't really have a question. I thought Alexandra's question earlier on was really interesting around how accelerators might change, and so talking about the topic of scale-ups, in particular around how there are new kind of quite complex technologies coming out, InsurTech and then RegTech and blockchain. The level of expertise involved to get these types of startups right, it's quite rarefied. Actually kind of, whereas I fully appreciate mentorship as a function is very helpful from a general business perspective, actually some of the deep kind of tech specialisms and kind of quite rarefied skill sets required for some of these like AI-based tech startups. Maybe kind of cloud-based distribution of kind of skill sets might be the model where people are literally, if they're based out of San Francisco or whatever, they're mentoring on a global basis. Because I think that might be a gap that becomes bigger and bigger as more and more complex technologies come out. Just a thought.
Understood as a comment rather than a question. Thank you very much. Any questions? Hi. Please shout.
Do you mind to list some business incubator or the accelerator based in London? The name of the
List business accelerators.
There's about 120 of them.
Go on Google.
There's a lot. There's
Google
a lot. Go to F6.
You're looking for 120.
Go to F6S.
Yeah.
A lot of them are listed there. Go to Capitalist. They list the London-based ones, and they can give you contacts there. But I mean, there's an incubator and an accelerator for just about everyone now. So there are the corporate ones, the sector-based ones, the stage-based ones. There's one hell of a lot of them. We've named some of them up here. I think it very much depends on what stage you're at, what you need, and in particular whether you like the kinds of people that are running the accelerator. You should be prepared. They all do a call for submissions, but be prepared to go and talk to them and grill them on how their program works and what they consider to be successful.
Last quick one.
So you had mentioned that the trend around accelerators is no longer taking an equity stake in a company. What are they looking then to get out of the relationship with you as a startup? And then also on the SAS side, you mentioned that that relationship exists around taking a percentage of revenues going forward. How then, when you're doing your revenue projections, what kind of time scales are you looking at, or certain milestones around your relationship?
Okay, I'll answer that very quickly. We're privately held, so we don't have the normal 6-month, 12-month, 18-month time horizons. In some cases, we are looking 3 to 5 years out. This is the beauty of being private. We are probably an anomaly, and to allude or to refer back to your question, that's exactly why we exist, is to be able to help companies solve the technical problems, because we do them. We are a technology company. We're not ashamed of it. All right? We spend 800 million a year in R&D. That's a hideous amount of money, considering we earn 3 billion a year. That's all we do. Honestly, we've got more PhDs than any other company in pure volume. And like most people will be ashamed of that. We're not. Our founder still owns the company, and it was founded in 1976. We only do one thing, all right? And when our founder stood up at a major global conference recently, what did he do? He presented every possible solution to Sudoku in 3.5 seconds. That should tell you everything about the nature of the company.
So I'll take the first part of that question. It does vary by accelerator, and for those of you considering an accelerator, ask them why they exist. Okay. It's a very good question to ask them. So, Mass Challenge is a charity. Okay, they exist to make it happen for startups globally. Why does Microsoft Ventures do what they do? Because they're building an ecosystem based on their cloud platform. Why does Level 39 exist? Exist to create new clients for Canary Wharf Group, because after Lehman Brothers collapsed and they lost a tenant in a building, they decided that the way forward was to incubate companies that became tenants in their properties. And if you think that's a joke, go and ask them. That is why they exist, and it is working for them. They are creating tenants. So there are lots of reasons why they exist. I think the old model of we'll give you 15 grand and take 7% of your company, I think a lot of smart people now are saying, oh, that doesn't really work for me, frankly. And you will see it in accelerators in particular. We've seen some fall by the wayside, and in particular those ones that started early with that basic model, which is greed. Those are the ones that are failing fast. If they adopt their model and change, then they'll survive.
It's about that alignment I was talking about earlier. You need to find an accelerator that's actually aligned with what it is you're trying to do. The other thing I'd like to sort of say is there's not just accelerators that are really useful in this space at the moment, particularly in the fintech area. I've been very impressed with the FCA, with their innovator scheme. I mean, we're looking at a lot of things from the technical point of view, but if it's a financial product, there's a good chance it's going to be regulated, and actually knowing what to do and having people that are available that would give you what would otherwise be thousands of pounds worth of professional advice that which you don't have, you may not have a product that's legally compliant, is probably a really good thing to have. So it's good to see that there are some really good government initiatives as well to help start up and scale up businesses proof concept.
Cool.
So can
Thank
I
you,
just
folks,
add on to that?
but I'm afraid we
2
are
seconds,
out of time.
30 seconds?
Less.
30 seconds?
2
Just
seconds.
to add on to this comment, I think it's really interesting to watch both public and private bodies kind of support startups. And I'll end that with saying that I'd love to see more public and private bodies support scale-ups, because that's when it gets really difficult. And I feel like sometimes the expertise is lacking.
Cool. Thank you very much. Can we have a massive round of applause for everyone on the panel?